Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to another video about Star Wars Unlimited. This is going to be a big one. Thank you to my patrons who will be seeing this early. This is the result of a good amount of testing and a lot of me watching a lot of other coverage and listening to what other people have to say as well. This is going to be my meta thoughts on the August meta. So this is going to be very, very early into Shadows of the Galaxy, pretty much about 3 weeks in. And this is what I'm going to predict we will be seeing at Gen Con, which is going to be happening this week. As well as into the store showdown season. I think largely the meta is going to be this until someone develops something new, right? Like some new technology does need to emerge here. Something has to happen because right now I definitely think that we are relying on old favorites as far as the meta goes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Thank you so much to my patrons who are seeing this on Patreon. If you're seeing this on YouTube, you're seeing this in a week or two probably. My patrons have had this for a while, and I'm sure have been making excellent use of it. So let's get started. Firstly, the basics of this tier list. You can see I'm doing this in a presentation instead of on Tier Maker because I just think Tier Maker isn't going to really work nowadays with how many different options there are in Star Wars Unlimited. So what am I talking about when I say meta breakdown, tier list? What do I mean? I'm evaluating I'm evaluating a given deck on 5 axes and then factoring in one, and there's an additional consideration that you should be having when you then go to make your deck decision for a particular event. So the axes on which you should be evaluating is firstly power level, right? Fundamentally, how good is the deck? This is not the be-all and end-all, but obviously if a deck has a higher power level in general, then that is going to make it more likely to be pretty good. Equally, if the power level of the deck is relatively low, that can be a sign that maybe you shouldn't play it, but equally, there are other factors. Consistency. Yes, a deck can be very, very high power, 1 in 20 games, and it could be pretty mid-power, the remaining 19. Okay, well, so what's your expected value of the deck's power level, right? You need to be factoring that in with consistency. Yeah, so basically how often is your deck able to consistently execute its game plan? And this is a two-pronged thing. This is one, in terms of your actual deck building, like how often does it happen? And two, how easy is it to disrupt? And how likely are the tools for disruption to be in the meta, right? Like if you get disrupted by your opponent deploying their leader, I don't know, like I'm just, spitballing here, right? Or your opponent playing Rival Sword, for example. Okay, fine, that is a silver bullet to your deck, but how many decks are playing Rival Sword in the format? And this is going to be something that you need to bear in mind. Now, I think it's a good amount, but just something to bear in mind. Popularity. This is another one, right? Like, fundamentally, some characters are more popular than others, and they are just going to see more play because people do want to play with their favorite characters. This is an IP game. That's something you are going to have to factor in. Matchups. Big one, right? Like, yeah, what are my good matchups? What are my bad matchups? And this is all going to factor in to what you choose. And finally, probably a less significant one on the large-scale events, but a more significant one on the slightly smaller-scale events, and that is cost. How expensive is the deck, right? If the deck is very, very cheap, I'd expect to see more of it. If the deck is very, very expensive, I'd expect to see less of it. Fundamentally, that is just how it is. And then the last thing I want to flag here with regional is just there are regional differences. So the big regional difference I observe from my UK perspective is in the UK, we really, really like our aggro and mid-range. We are much more fond of those decks, whereas in the US, I see a lot more control and hard control. That's not to say that there aren't people who play hard control and control in the UK, and there aren't people who play aggro and mid-range in the US. Obviously, there are. But my, my observation is that generally speaking, it is more popular in the US to play these control decks, and it is less popular to do so here. So that's just something to bear in mind, and I don't know, and this is going to be even more variable on that granular level when you get down to your individual local game store, and only you will know your local meta, right? Only you will know the players who go there and what they play. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so I just want to immediately, not worth discussing. I'm not going to bother wasting any time on any of these leaders. I think, maybe Moff Gideon shouldn't be down here, and maybe Bo-Katan, but, let's just move on. Okay. So, I've tiered these by scale of event. So, we start off with local tier here. And I don't think any of these decks are bad. I just want to immediately get that out there. I actually think all of these decks are pretty decent, can get wins. You'll notice that I've put an aspect on the right where I think that's buildable, and I think that's something that we should be considering. Not all decks have all aspects, right? Like, not all color combos are worth playing. One thing I want to flag, you can see this is the vast majority of these are, well, actually about half of these are set 1 decks and half of these are set 2 decks. I have tended to err on the side of caution with the set 2 decks, because there's a very much an element of, it's the shiny new toy. I don't want to over represent power level or popularity or meta relevancy. So I've tended to be like, okay, like, I think, so for example, a great one here is Jabba for me. I think Jabba for me has potential to go up even 2 tiers. But I put it in locals tier because for now, I haven't seen a list that, solves the issues the deck has fundamentally. And equally, I also think that that list won't emerge for a while because the meta does need to stabilize. And of course, the big thing is I haven't seen it perform, right? Like, and we don't know that the list is even necessarily going to come that fixes these issues. So I've erred on the side of caution, right? Like, same with Saxon, which I think, is more likely to be good than Jabba based on like early results with the shielded deck, right? I don't think I have a massive amount to say about the decks on this slide. I will flag the decks that I think could jump up a tier. I think Chirrut, I'm probably being a little harsh on Chirrut here, but I do think that's because it's very hard to justify playing Chirrut when, like, basically the same deck exists but better. And of course it is going to be a meta call. And Chirrut is a good deck, but is it? I don't know. It was tier 1.5 in set 1. It feels like it might have been pushed down into tier 2 in set 2. But yeah, so just the one thing I wanted to flag is all the set 2 decks here, I think, have the most potential to go up as they are explored more. Whereas the set 1 decks have probably had the bulk of work done on them that is going to get done on them. And I think that certainly there's potential, right? Like, it's 36 leaders in the game. Obviously, something is going to come up. I'm not saying this is definitive. But my bet would be on a set 2 leader getting a big, being broken wide open by, like, some new discovery of a particular list versus a set 1 deck. But yeah, okay, so this is the relatively boring stuff, This is locals tier. You take it, you want to have fun at locals. It's not going to be anything broken, and your friends won't hate you. Store Showdown. So this is, I think, the first tier at which, and you can see, actually, if we count it up, right, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. That is 19 leaders, right? So over half the leaders in the game have already been eliminated from, like, meta contention, basically, in, like, the top tiers, top echelons, right? As we move into Store Showdown, you can see I've got another 7 here, right? So that's 26 leaders. So there's only 10 left in the tiers above this. So Store Showdown tier, this is, I would say, classically speaking, this is probably like tier 1.5. They're good. They're definitely good. But I just think they have some glaring weaknesses that are that are probably, like, too easy to exploit. I don't think fundamentally, like, for me, you need to be able to soundly beat the top meta decks that were around in set 1, right? Like, so basically, I mean, spoiler alert, Boba and Sabine. If you can't beat Boba and Sabine, basically just with very minimal set 2 upgrades consistently, I'm immediately going to be, like, doubtful that you're going to really rise above. Store Showdowns are reasonably big events, but they're about 32 players. So you probably will see some meta rep, and you might not win a Store Showdown with one of these decks, but you could. You definitely could. So going across it, right, like Greenwich and Iden, we've seen these decks do very, very well. They're good control decks. Now, obviously, I think they are basically worse versions of a new leader, which we'll talk about shortly, and I think it's very much been usurped, but I definitely think they're still decent. And if you're comfortable playing these decks, then by all means, just keep playing them. Grand Inquisitor, I think, has room to grow. And so does Han Solo. I want to flag both of these decks as, like, okay, actually, I think there is upward mobility here. And the reason I'm saying that is I think both of these leaders need to be way more explored with the set 2 card pool. Han Solo, I think, fundamentally is running into the issue of it can't really beat the all-space decks at the moment. And obviously the lists will need to adapt and we'll need to start playing a lot more space in Han Solo. But, it depends on the aspect combo as well. But a lot of the Han Solo lists I've seen, right, it's like, oh, I'm just going to ramp out big ground thing, big ground thing, big ground thing. Primarily because the space units tend to have slightly reduced stats as a cost for going into space. So, as a result, people tend to be prioritizing the ground units because they've got more health, so that they're slightly more tanky, they're going to be slightly better. But that means that you're very, very weak to these all-space decks, which we've seen, and 2 of them here, right? Tarkin and Boba Fett, these are the premier sort of, all-space decks. 2 of the 3. And, the triple dark raid abusing decks, and it's like, okay, well, if I can't beat those, and those aren't even like the top tier meta, right? Like, and but they are meta warping enough that you need to have an answer for them. So I think there's a sort of element there where I'm like a little iffy on it, but I definitely think there's potential. I would not be shocked to see Han Solo jump all the way up. I really am very high on this leader. I think fundamentally its cheating costs, it's insane. And I would absolutely be keeping an eye out for this to have some of the most upward mobility out of everything I've shown so far. GI, I think, could definitely move up one tier. I doubt it's ever going to be like meta breaking, but I think there's a lot of potential here for this leader. I have a showcase. Anyway, Luke Green has been doing good. I don't have a massive amount to say about Luke Green, but it's been doing well. It's a good deck. It's really fun to see Luke actually doing well for once. Okay, so then we have got, I already talked about Tarkin and Boba, but these are basically these sort of premier all-space decks that, two of the three of them, and the next one will come on to the next slide. And basically they've warped the format, thanks to Lurking TIE Phantom and Triple Dark Raid. We now have to basically have answers, or at least play around these decks existing, and know they exist, and they've warped the thinking of the game. And if you don't play around them, you just get completely blown out and you lose. So they have got to be here, and they're good, right? Because the thing is, even when you know they're coming, like, they're still annoying. You still have to deal with them, right? It's not like it's okay. Well, now I know they're coming, so I'm fine. Yeah, you know they're coming, but like you can still get blown out. So yeah, so Store Showdown tier. These are, I would say, that tier 1.5 decks. All right. Potentially the most exciting tier now. This is Planetary Qualifier. And these are decks I would take to a 128 to 256. I think Planetary Qualifier is 128, but maybe they might be as much as 256. Big events. I would take these decks to big events, and I would feel comfortable doing so. And we got a lot to talk about here, because this is the juice, right? Like, this is where we're actually sitting here and we're going, okay, what new leaders have managed to break into this tier at this early stage? So I'm going to actually work right to left, and I'm going to talk about Kira. I think I have to talk about Kira first, because essentially what has happened here is this leader has gone, oh, hey, you know those two very similar control decks from set 1? I am basically just an upgrade, right? Like, and so one huge thing about Kira, firstly, is she deploys on 5. This is massive for being able to keep up with a lot of the premier meta threats. In particular, I am thinking of like Boba and Sabine, right? This is a very, very powerful leader into those, like in being able to keep up with those two. Speaking of Boba, Kira answers Boba, and that is massive. You deploy Kira, Boba goes down to a 4-3, and Kira can clear it. This is a big deal. This is a really, really, really big deal. Answering Boba means that they're not going to be getting their crazy flip turn value necessarily. I mean, they'll get some, but you have removed their leader, unless they're able to do something like put a Boba Fett's armor on it or whatever have you, right? But like fundamentally, right, you have game into Boba, and I think this is a big deal. And you have game where Krennic and Iden didn't have as much game, so this is a big deal, really, really big deal. Do not sleep on Kira. This is probably the best control deck in the game right now. Soft control, best soft control deck in the game. I think there's better control in hard control. Rey, this is the new hotness. I think this is the newest new hotness. Very, very popular deck. Rey Red. I think these mono blue decks are also doing quite well just because of there's a lot of very, very powerful cards in blue. Fundamentally, it's a very, very good color. I think blue villainy is just got some absolute ridiculous stuff there. But yeah, Rey Red, able to abuse the Rey's ability to just buff cards, and suddenly you start, yes, you're trading actions, but you do suddenly start seeing your units becoming very, very scary when they were costed in a certain way as a sort of balancing effect, right? My favorite example here is Moisture Farmer, because Moisture Farmer, over the course of 3 turns, can become a 3/7 with Restore 2, which is ridiculous, right? Like, if you ever manage to get that, aggro can't win, right? And Moisture Farmer is a crazy card, right? Because suddenly we see a deck here that actually, oh, you know what? This really does have game into aggro, and this is a big deal. With the Restore 3 on Rey, you are able to have that longevity to get you into that late game, and you can start slamming down like Crate Dragons or something, right? Like, it's great. I'm a big, big fan of Rey. I think it's really, really, really good. Bosk, another new hotness. And I think there's a bit of, I think green is, at the moment, the sort of, the runaway favorite. But I think yellow and blue, both very viable options here. And I like that this was a leader that the design team didn't think was going to be very good. They were like, oh yeah, we designed it for draft. Guys, it's kind of good in Premier. Deploying on 5, 4/6 stat line. Not Boba, but good. Certainly, very, very good. Very, very good. With the bounty ability, if you're able to resolve that Bosk double bounty collection even once, it's crazy. This deck can ramp insanely hard. This deck can plus really, really hard. Bounty Hunter's Quarry is absolutely crazy. My biggest regret is that this isn't in yellow, to be honest. If this was in yellow, I'd be like, okay, now we're cooking. Now we are truly cooking. Because yellow has some insane bounty stuff. But anyway, yellow-green would be my ideal bounty combination with Bosk's effect. But anyway, yeah, I think huge amount of potential in Bosk. And I'm not seeing it going anywhere. Kylo. Another new hotness. We'll do all of the new hotness leaders. Kylo is the new aggro deck, unless you're playing green Kylo, which is looking to be a lot more of that. Control the early game, make it to the late game, and start doing absolute bullshit. Because remember, like Kylo's ability to just buff your stats can be really relevant, right? It does it for the whole phase. So unless stuff is getting hard removed, it can actually be really, really tough. That power buff can get you out of the range of things like cunning. And it can also mean that where you weren't trading before, you are now. So I think there's a huge amount of stuff here, and then you get Palpatine's return, right? Start cheating out Mauls or Palpatines or Vaders that you've just discarded in the early game. You're just getting out a turn earlier. You're ramping as well. So like you can imagine the sort of stuff you're able to do in this deck. I think very, very, very powerful. But very unexplored. I think yellow is the other, so Kylo yellow is the other all-space deck, which doesn't even have to be all-space. And I think all three of these have a huge amount of potential and all need to be explored further. My personal favorite is going to be this Kylo green. I just think there's so much potential there to do real nonsense, which I'm very, very, very excited for. But yeah. Han, I think, I have to give kudos to Han. It's won 2 1Ks this past weekend. Personally, I think this is the most overrated leader in the set. In the current format. I think people are glazing it, and I just don't see how it handles the top meta dogs, right? And this is kind of true with set 1 as well, right? Like, a lot of people had Han rated really, really highly, and I think Han needs a late stage format where people just aren't on Boba and Sabine as much, because I just think Boba and Sabine are rough. They're really, really tough for this deck. And in particular, Sabine just feels absolutely horrendous. Like, a good Sabine green player is going to ruin a mono Han's day. And I just think fundamentally when you're dealing with yellow, as like Han green, for example, and they just sit there and go, yeah, cool, no good to me, Dad, your turn's just over. All right, so it's a bit tough. I definitely think I have to put Han in Planetary just because it puts up such strong results. But I think I don't think this has anywhere further to go. I think this is the highest it'll be. Vader ramp, still great. And Vader hard control, probably less good. Probably should have put that in the tier below, but I'm going to put it here. I think it is good. But, Vader is Vader. It's always going to be really, really solid. And finally, Palp. Lots of Palp variants here. And we have to put Palp in here because I think Palp absolutely feeds on the soft control and the mid-range decks. I mean, it is so hard to deal with Palp because it plays a lot more gas, a lot more top end, has just so much survivability. Just an insanely strong deck. Yeah, you cannot ignore the Papa Palp, right? Like, this deck is crazy. Huge amount of game. You need to be able to beat it. Of course, the issue with the deck is those aggro decks are going to be a real struggle for it. And I think right now the meta is going to be very, very aggro, at least in the UK. Maybe not so much in the US, but like here, I'm expecting a lot of aggro. So I would never want to take Palp to something like that. But I think the deck is absolutely amazing with all these color combos. Okay, before we get on to the final bit, I just want to give a special mention to the good but not Boba tier decks. Rip my man Cad Bane, like, and rip Afra, dude. Like, I'm sorry, there is just no reason that right now until some new list emerges. From what I've seen at the moment, there is just no reason to play either of these leaders when Boba exists. Now you can play them for fun, but fundamentally you are just playing worse Boba. And if you're okay with that, you're okay with that. But I have to say it, right? Like, it is what it is. We are where we are. And finally, Galactic tier. These are the ruling champions, right? These are the decks that you just need to be able to beat. Or you need to be okay with not being able to beat, right? You need to play decks which lose to these in a situation where you don't think they're going to be there. So starting with Sabine, I think Sabine Yellow is the worst on this Galactic tier list by a considerable margin. I think like it's to the point where I probably should have put Sabine Yellow down a tier below. But yeah, Sabine Green is ridiculous, like truly ridiculous. Poe, Rekka, and Darksaber are some of the most insane upgrades this deck could have gotten. It really didn't need all of them. One or two of them probably would have done the job. Yeah, I mean, just unreal, the game this deck has. It's also harder to play than it looks. And that's due to the resourcing decisions you need to make and the fact that you basically need to always be eking out every little bit of extra damage you can to secure those wins, especially in a field with way less 25 HP bases, I think, than we've seen for a lot of periods in the past. A lot of 30 HP bases in the format nowadays. So it definitely, Sabine is having a tougher time into those. But bloody hell, this deck is good. And as I said, yeah, it has such a good matchup into a lot of the stuff in the Planetary tier. And Boba, I mean, the best leader in the game. Is it the best deck in the game? I don't think so. I think you can always play Boba though, right? Like there's never a situation when you can't pick up Boba and just play it, right? Because you fundamentally, right, if we look at what our aspect breakdown here is, we have Boba Yellow, which is a premier aggro deck, not as good as Sabine, in the sense of like, sorry, not as fast as Sabine, and not as fast as Kylo, but with a huge amount of disruption that arguably makes it better. Then you move into the mid-range and you have your Boba Green with your ECLs, and that's my personal favorite deck at the moment that I've been playing. I think it's super strong and being a little slept on at the moment. Like, yeah, people rate it, but I never see it played. And then you go over into the control land. And by the way, this Boba Blue list has evolved. So now we have a soft control Boba Blue and we have a hard control Boba Blue. And I haven't even included like Boba Red. But what this basically means is in the top tier of the meta, right, whichever type of deck you want to play for a given meta, Boba is there. You can just play Boba. And a lot of the time, you do have to sit there and ask yourself, why am I not just playing Boba, right? And I think like, and this is what I mean, like the deck is not broken. It's never a situation where you go like, oh yeah, Boba is clearly like, oh, I've got to play Boba Green. There's nothing as good as Boba Green. That's absolutely not true. But in every single meta, you can sit there, you can evaluate the field, and you can go, okay, there is a Boba deck for this. I can just take Boba here. And so you've got to be prepared for it. And these are the two decks you must categorically be prepared for. Because if you're not, you're gonna do really badly. I don't know what else to say, right? Like you just have to be prepared for these decks. And that's it. That's my tier list. So that is where I see the meta being at the moment. To reiterate, if you're going to Gen Con, I think you just take Boba or Sabine. I think it is safe. Personally, if I was going to take a deck, I would play either ECL Sabine, Boba Yellow, or Boba Green. I would choose between those three. And I would make the meta call based on the decks I'm like likely to see. Right, like if I'm expecting like a load of hard control, then you know maybe we lean off the Boba, right? But if I'm expecting to see a lot of like, you know, soft control to like I don't know, a lot of other aggro decks, right? Like then maybe I'm gonna be like, oh yes, Boba very good, or Sabine very good, right? Like I'm gonna make my decision, right? Like, but fundamentally, I just think there's no real reason not to take these in the early stages of the meta. They're tried, they're tested, they're easily upgradable. And they're really strong, and everyone else is probably playing suboptimal lists, whereas yours is going to be 99% of the way there, just because these are set 1 decks that were basically solved because they were so good. But there we go. That's it. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, like it, subscribe to the channel. Thank you to my patrons for your support. I'm going to be doing these, I think, fairly regularly. I'm thinking I'll try and do it once a month, but I will definitely do these with every set, 100%. If nothing else, I will do them like the next one of these will be as we move into Planetary qualifiers. I think this will probably hold true. I'll probably do these like as we see like if there's a big meta shift, and as long as these are relevant, I'll probably just leave them up there and I won't really amend them. But then if there's like some big meta shift, or there's like a big tournament like thing coming up, I'll probably do more then. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have I got anything wrong? Have I got everything right? I am interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.